Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into one of the most profound, dense, and frankly multi-layered pieces of American literature ever put to paper, Toni Morrison's Pulitzer Prize-winning masterpiece, Beloved. It's this incredible text that weaves together history, deep psychology, and the supernatural to tell a story that is just as haunting as it is absolutely necessary. So our goal today is to break down this complex puzzle using a clear, structured approach so we can really wrap our heads around the sheer magnitude of what Morrison achieved here. Right off the bat, let's talk about a staggering number: 60 million. This represents the estimated death toll of the Atlantic slave trade. And Morrison actually uses the phrase 60 million and more as the solemn dedication right at the very beginning of the novel. It's a completely sobering, monumental figure, and it instantly sets the scale for the trauma we're about to explore. We're not just looking at one single family story. We are dealing with a narrative that carries the heavy historical weight of 60 million lost lives.
To navigate a text this dense without getting lost, we're going to peel it back layer by layer. First, we'll look at the historical foundation. Then we'll examine the psychological ghost, zoom out to what's known as a cultural haunting, trace the path to healing, and finally, wrap up with the novel's legacy and the controversies that still surround it today.
Starting off with Section 1, the foundation, history, and the haunting. Because you see, Toni Morrison didn't just invent the core tragedy of this book out of thin air.
Back in 1974, while editing a collection of Black history, she stumbled upon an 1856 newspaper article about a real woman named Margaret Garner. In January of that year, Garner and her family fled a Kentucky plantation, desperately hoping to find freedom up in Cincinnati, Ohio. But under the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, they were hunted down. Cornered by law enforcement and her enslaver, Garner made a completely unimaginable choice. She killed her own 2-year-old daughter with a butcher knife rather than see her dragged back into the horrific atrocities of slavery. Morrison took this horrific historical reality and used it as the absolute springboard for her fictional protagonist, Sethe.
But here's where Morrison makes a fascinating pivot from pure history into fiction. She drops us into the year 1873, well after the Civil War. Sethe and her surviving teenage daughter, Denver, are living in Cincinnati at 124 Bluestone Road. But they are completely isolated from their community. Why? Because their house is actively haunted by a deeply spiteful, malevolent spirit, the ghost of the baby Sethe killed.
Which brings us to Section 2, the psychological ghost, the embodiment of trauma.
The character of Beloved is this brilliant exercise in duality. On a purely literal level, sure, she's a classic horror element. First, she's this unseen poltergeist throwing slop jars and shattering mirrors. Later, she literally walks out of the water as a fully grown young woman and moves right into Sethe's house. But metaphorically, that's where it hits hard. Beloved is the physical embodiment of unutterable trauma. She represents the fractured identities and violently repressed memories that these characters are just desperately trying to keep buried.
Because really, characters like Sethe, Denver, and their friend Paul D., a formerly enslaved man who moves in with them, are grappling with what academics call an unmade self. The horrors they survived at the Sweet Home plantation shattered them. To keep going, they had to severely repress their memories, which completely stripped away their true identities. Take Sethe's maternal bond, for instance. It's twisted by trauma to the point where she views her children as her best self, which directly led to her tragic act of protection. Or look at Paul D., who suffered such extreme emasculation and trauma on a chain gang that he literally locked his emotions away in what he calls a tobacco tin heart.
Let's pull back the lens for Section 3, a cultural haunting, magical realism, and collective memory.
There's this term coined by scholar Kathleen Brogan called a cultural haunting, and it perfectly explains Morrison's deliberate move away from just telling a simple Gothic ghost story. A cultural haunting uses ghosts to actively revive histories that were intentionally erased or poorly documented. So, by having Beloved manifest as a physical being, Morrison isn't just writing a spook tale, she's reconstructing the undocumented interior lives and social bonds of enslaved people. She's turning a deeply private haunting into a massive public reckoning.
Listen to this quote from Morrison herself about African-American ghost lore. People who die tragically do not remain in the earth. That perfectly captures how ingrained spirits are in this cultural heritage. Because millions died under horrific, unjust circumstances with no proper burials or historical records, their presence just lingers. The haunting in this novel isn't just about Sethe's personal guilt. It is a shared, collective confrontation of ancestral suffering.
Okay, moving to Section 4, reclaiming the unmade self,
the path to healing. Because as Beloved's presence grows, she actually starts draining the literal life out of Sethe.
To understand how they fight back, you have to grasp Morrison's mind-bending concept of rememory. In this universe, a memory isn't just a fleeting thought in your brain. It's a physical force or place you can literally bump into out in the world. Morrison is basically telling us that spending your whole life avoiding the past will destroy you. Confronting these physical memories, as terrifying as they might be, is absolutely the only way towards self-discovery and becoming whole again.
So what does that healing process actually look like? It happens in 3 distinct steps. First, you have to acknowledge those painful, repressed memories. Second, you mentally reorganize the horrific events. And third, you have to constitute that trauma into language and share it. We see this play out perfectly with Sethe's daughter, Denver. When Denver realizes her mom is being consumed by Beloved, she finally finds the courage to step off the edge of the world, meaning she leaves their isolated yard to ask the local community for help. By sharing that burden, she brings a group of local women to the house, and through the raw, collective power of their voices, they manage to exorcise the ghost. Which brings us to this incredibly moving realization at the end of the narrative. The ghost is gone, and Paul D. returns to find Sethe bedridden and broken. She's crying, saying Beloved was her best thing, showing she still ties her entire self-worth to the child she lost. But Paul D. looks at her and says, "You are your best thing, Sethe. You are." It is this powerful moment where Sethe can finally begin to value her own unmade self above her tragic past.
Let's look at the real-world impact in Section 5, acclaim, legacy, and censorship. Beloved today.
The critical footprint of Beloved is just massive. It's a true masterclass in American literature. After it initially missed out on the National Book Award, which actually sparked a huge letter of protest from 48 prominent black writers, it went on to rightfully win the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction in 1988. It routinely tops major lists evaluating the greatest literature ever written in the English language.
And Morrison herself explained exactly why this book needed to exist during an award acceptance in 1988. She pointed out that there were no physical monuments honoring the millions forced into slavery in America. No plaques, no wreaths, no benches. So Beloved had to act as that memorial. And incredibly, her words ended up inspiring the Bench by the Road project, which now places actual physical memorial benches at historical sites across the country. But because the novel is such an unflinching memorial to unspeakable horrors, its graphic depictions of trauma make it one of the most frequently challenged and banned books in American schools. Just looking at the 2021 to 2022 academic year, it was removed from at least 11 schools, including places like Katy ISD in Texas. When it gets censored, the reasons most often cited are its depictions of explicit sexuality, graphic violence, and infanticide.
And you can see how this plays out politically by mapping the timeline. The novel sits right at the epicenter of modern debates over parental rights and school curriculums. Back in 2017, a parent in Virginia complained about the book's graphic nature. That complaint led to the drafting of the Beloved Bill, designed to notify parents about sexually explicit content. Governor Terry McAuliffe vetoed it. But then, 4 years later, candidate Glenn Youngkin prominently featured that exact veto and the parents' effort to ban the book in a successful 2021 gubernatorial campaign. So the novel continues to be a major flashpoint in conversations about what belongs in the classroom.
Which brings us to a final thought for this explainer. Toni Morrison showed us, through the lives of Sethe, Denver, and Paul D., that ignoring the ghosts of the past doesn't make them go away. It just lets them consume us. It's only by stepping off the edge of the world, acknowledging the trauma, and finding a shared voice that we can actually start to heal. So if our history is haunted by unspeakable trauma, how does confronting that very rememory shape the path forward for our collective future? Thank you so much for joining me to explore the profound layers of Beloved. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.